But just imagine all this time and you're in that position. And then you get to the position where you're in another contract negotiation. You're not hearing what you want to hear. You're not hearing it not only in the money, but in also they're talking funny in terms of giving you greater role. And you're like, it's time to move on. Imagine you're in that moment. What will make you, a report comes out after you do a Monday show, not show up for work on Tuesday?
Because we talked about the whole Molly Qerim situation in the morning. We're thinking, okay, it's going to play out, and there's going to be a grand farewell, celebration show, goodbye. And she just Dear John'd him. She said, out. I was like, wow. So obviously, this is pretty obvious. At least from Molly's point of view, I don't think it was the most amicable split.
Stephen A. Smith tried to play it cool, brushing off Molly's exit as none of anybody's business. Yet he quietly admitted he wasn't even told the full story himself. That slip exposed something way bigger than he meant to, because if ESPN kept their top star in the dark, then this wasn't a simple contract decision. It was a carefully managed situation that executives didn't want leaking out. Molly stepping away after a decade of solid chemistry on First Take hit the entire sports world like a shockwave.
Miss Molly Qerim, longtime host for ESPN's First Take, my day job, where she has been the last 10 years. Last night, she abruptly resigned as the host of the show. And to say that I'm quite sad about it is an understatement.
On September 15th, 2025, she announced her resignation effective immediately, with no warm goodbye, no transition period, nothing. Fans and insiders instantly started asking the same question: why so sudden? What makes this moment even more intense is what Stephen A. eventually admitted about why working together had become impossible. His comments didn't just sound frustrated, they hinted at a whole maze of issues that had been quietly boiling under the surface for months. Behind ESPN's polished set, the relationship that looked unbreakable had already been cracking.
So let me start the speculation. When I heard that it was immediate, I was like, oh, she must already have a job lined up. Mm-hmm. And the job that she has lined up must be some sort of competitor to ESPN. And so that made me, is she going to Fox Sports?
Reportedly, tension kept building over major pay gaps, constant disagreements over show direction, and what some insiders described as a total collapse in professional communication. Every week, the energy on set allegedly grew heavier, and even fans claimed they noticed moments where something just felt off. That glossy image of unity, the clean, cheerful moderator guiding the fiery debate star, was never as perfect as it looked.
This is a thankless job being a moderator. I know a lot of people who've sat in that same position on different shows, that show, and this, trust me, is a thankless position. It's hard to see somebody raise their hand and keep it up high for this long. I'm actually thoroughly surprised that Molly Qerim made it this long in that position.
And eventually the pressure behind the scenes became too much to hide, leading to a departure so abrupt and dramatic that it shook the entire network. Those words Stephen A. Smith shared on September 16th, 2025 sounded sincere, almost emotional, like he was genuinely shaken by the sudden exit of the co-host he'd worked beside for nearly 10 years. But the version he gave later that same day on his Sirius XM show, completely different energy.
Last night, after much reflection, I've decided it's time to close this incredible chapter and step away from First Take. Hosting this show has been one of the greatest honors of my career. Every morning I had the privilege of sharing the desk with some of the most brilliant, passionate, and entertaining voices in sports, and with all of you, the best fans in the world.
Confusion, frustration, and hints of uncomfortable details that ESPN clearly didn't want spilling out. The timeline makes the whole situation even more unbelievable. Less than a full day before her final appearance on September 15th, Molly was sitting on the First Take desk, doing her job like nothing was off. No tension on air, no unusual coldness, nothing that screamed, "I'm out." Then, out of nowhere, the Sports Business Journal dropped a midday bombshell.
So she may have been making $2.5, $3 million as the host. Well, when Stephen A. is sitting there making 20, well, maybe now she wants to make 10. And maybe ESPN will, we'll pay you 5, Molly. And then on the same day, Malika Andrews gets a new contract, or it gets announced, and I'm sure Molly said, "Well, they paid Malika this,"
reporting that she had declined ESPN's contract extension and would be stepping away at the end of 2025. But what Stephen A. said later on his radio show made the story even more chaotic. He sounded thrown off and almost blindsided, which only fueled speculation that this departure wasn't planned, wasn't smooth, and definitely wasn't handled well behind the scenes. His tone said it all. There was more happening internally than anyone on camera was allowed to mention. The phrase abruptly resigned is doing heavy lifting here.
To be blunt, it came as a shock. I was not aware that this is something that she was contemplating doing. But in the end, she made her decision. And we have to move on as a show. I don't like it. I'm not happy about it, because I appreciate her and what she has meant to me, what she has meant to the show, what she has meant to the network, what she's meant to the business.
This wasn't some slow, graceful transition or a carefully orchestrated career move. This was sudden, messy, and clearly uncomfortable for the entire team. And the kicker? ESPN's president of content, Burke Magnus, later admitted that the early leak from the Sports Business Journal ruined everything. Once the story broke publicly before the network could control the announcement, the situation became impossible to manage. Suddenly, continuing to work together wasn't just awkward. Insiders say it became completely unrealistic, forcing the show into a split that nobody was ready for. The line, "The details are none of anybody's business," followed right away by,
I'm not surprised. I'm only surprised at the timing. I'm surprised that she didn't just tap out over the weekend and they make no mention of it and they land that plane a lot softer than they did. This was an abrupt landing. This is an emergency exit. This is an emergency landing. This is one of those for a reason. I give you what a therapist told me. Therapist told me it's not just how things end, it's why are they ending that way?
But it's not as if I know all the details is unbelievable, because Stephen A. basically exposed himself without realizing it. He tried to protect the situation while admitting he wasn't even fully informed, which only fuels the belief that this entire exit was handled behind closed doors, away from the people closest to Molly. When Molly confirmed her departure through an Instagram story, she wrote, "After much reflection, I've decided it's time to close this incredible chapter and step away from First Take." But here's the part fans couldn't ignore.
Report said she turned down the contract, which means that she had probably seen all that she wanted to see at the, at that network. Mind you, she has been with ESPN for 20 years. 20 years. If you do anything, or if you work for any company for 20 years, maybe after some time, maybe you'll get tired. Maybe you want to do something else. I don't know how much money Molly made. I'm sure she made very good money working on TV and working at that network.
She didn't mention Stephen A. Smith by name at all. After 10 years sitting directly beside him every morning, that silence was loud. Former ESPN analyst Marcellus Wiley immediately pointed this out on his podcast, suggesting the omission wasn't accidental but a very deliberate signal that something deeper had gone wrong. And once you look at the numbers, the tension starts making a whole lot more sense. In March 2025, Stephen A. signed a 5-year, $100 million extension, locking in a massive $20 million per year deal that made him ESPN's top earner.
The obvious take is that whatever happened is it wasn't amicable. This is not them parting on good terms. I think you look at the way it was reported by Austin Karp at Sports Business Journal on Monday night, and it comes out that, she's going to be done at the end of the year, which is pretty early, I would say, in these type of negotiations to make that sort of judgment when you're still 3 months out. But sometimes that happens. Sometimes both sides realize they're at the end, and they've reached kind of a stalemate, and they both decide to go their separate ways.
Meanwhile, Molly's reported salary sat in the range of $500,000 to $600,000, meaning Stephen A. was earning roughly 33 to 40 times more than the person keeping the show on track every single weekday. Fans couldn't wrap their heads around it. Molly moderated ESPN's highest-rated show for a full decade, managing the biggest personalities in sports media, calming heated debates, guiding conversations, and keeping the entire production balanced. Her role demanded constant focus and professionalism, yet her pay didn't reflect how essential she was to First Take's success. The gap becomes even more shocking when compared to other ESPN salaries. Kirk Herbstreit reportedly brings in around $18 million annually. Mike Greenberg makes about $6.5 million to host Get Up. Even each co-host of Pardon the Interruption earns around $6 million a year. Every one of those male ESPN personalities was earning at least 10 times more than Molly, and that alone already raised eyebrows. But the situation gets even messier once you look at what was happening with other women at the network. On September 16, 2025, literally just hours after Molly's exit hit the news, ESPN announced that Malika Andrews had secured a brand new multi-year extension, reportedly worth several $million, a salary far beyond anything Molly had ever been offered. Marcellus Wiley dug into this on his podcast and suggested something that made fans stop in their tracks. He believes Molly was watching younger talent get bigger deals while she remained stuck at a fraction of that pay, despite carrying ESPN's most important morning show for a decade. According to Wiley, she approached ESPN to renegotiate, expecting her contributions to finally be valued. But the offer she received? He described it as a lowball that felt dismissive after everything she had put into First Take. And this is where Stephen A's role becomes a major point of debate. Wiley and others claim that despite Stephen A's massive power at ESPN and his $20 million a year salary, he reportedly didn't go to bat for Molly during her negotiations. After 10 years sitting next to him, moderating every heated debate and keeping the show together, the idea that her co-host didn't advocate for her allegedly left her feeling unsupported at the worst possible moment. Then came the twist that changed everything. Reports surfaced that Fox Sports stepped in with a substantial offer for Molly, allegedly around $2 million per year. That's roughly 4 times what she was earning at ESPN. If true, it means a competing network recognized her value instantly and was ready to pay for it in a way ESPN had never been willing to match. Moments like these on air showed a playful back and forth between them, yet they also kept fueling long-running speculation about the real dynamic behind the desk. Fans kept wondering whether that closeness, while entertaining, might have complicated things when it came to serious matters like support, advocacy, and fair compensation. And to understand why their partnership eventually collapsed, you have to look at the uncomfortable patterns that reportedly built up over their decade together on First Take. The pay gap was massive, yes, but this situation was deeper than numbers. Their professional relationship had always sat in a complicated space, friendly at times, tense at others, walking a line that didn't always translate well on camera. Some moments made viewers laugh, but others had people questioning whether certain interactions were appropriate for a workplace broadcasted to millions. Over the years, there were several instances where Stephen A's comments about Molly's appearance sparked social media discussions about professionalism. While they were presented as harmless jokes, they still placed her in situations where she had to smile through remarks that didn't relate to her expertise or her role as the moderator, and every time it happened live, she had to figure out how to respond without derailing the show or creating tension on camera. The little shoulder comment, delivered casually on live TV, became one of the most discussed examples of this. Even if it was meant as humor, it still highlighted how easily the dynamic could shift into territory that made Molly look uncomfortable, while she tried to maintain her composure and keep the conversation moving. Then there was the infamous vibrating phone moment in October 2023, a clip that went viral for all the wrong reasons. When Molly's phone made noise during a live segment, Stephen A emphasized the word vibrating in a way that many viewers felt sounded suggestive, leaving her visibly uneasy on air. Even though it may not have been intended negatively, the reaction online was harsh, and fans said it showed exactly how awkward these exchanges could become. These moments, repeated over years, created a pattern where Molly often became the center of attention for reasons that had nothing to do with her professionalism, her discipline, or her sports knowledge. And when negotiations finally came around, it reportedly affected how her value was viewed and discussed behind closed doors. Insiders believe this long history of uncomfortable on-air interactions may have shaped how both sides saw her role, and possibly contributed to why her partnership with Stephen A eventually reached a place where continuing together no longer felt workable for her. According to several industry insiders and former ESPN employees, the tension behind the scenes had been building long before Molly decided to walk away. The creative direction of First Take was shifting, and Stephen A's influence inside the company had become enormous. His $20 million annual salary didn't just make him the face of ESPN, it gave him real power over programming decisions, guest selection, and even certain personnel choices. And when one person holds that much weight, it naturally shapes their relationships with everyone around them, including the person sitting right beside them on live TV every morning. Marcellus Wiley suggested on his podcast that Molly felt she didn't have a genuine advocate during her contract negotiations, and that Stephen A's silence hit harder than people realized. After a decade of building the show together, she reportedly believed he would use his influence to help her secure a fairer deal. But according to Wiley's theory, that support never came, and it left her feeling isolated during one of the most important career conversations of her life. This idea gains even more traction when you look closely at the wording of Molly's departure statement on Instagram. She thanked the most brilliant, passionate, and entertaining voices in sports, but noticeably did not mention Stephen A by name. After 10 years, hundreds of episodes, and countless mornings navigating debates together, the absence was impossible to ignore. It wasn't an accident, and it was a message about where their professional relationship stood by the end. Meanwhile, ESPN was dealing with massive internal budget pressures while also competing with streaming platforms and rival networks for top talent. This forced them into tough decisions about where to put their money and who they viewed as irreplaceable. And the answer was obvious: Stephen A. Smith. His enormous salary made it clear the network saw him as the centerpiece of their entire operation. But prioritizing one star at that level always comes with consequences. When a company funnels that much power and money into one person, other voices, even essential ones, end up sidelined. And for Molly, who had carried the show for years with professionalism and consistency, that reality became impossible to overlook. When one personality absorbs such a massive slice of the budget, everybody else, no matter how important they are, ends up fighting for whatever is left. And Molly's situation wasn't just about pay or creative control. There was another layer that made everything even more complicated: the long, uncomfortable history of incidents involving her and certain male guests on First Take. One of the most infamous was the 2019 exchange with LeVar Ball. When Molly tried to steer the discussion in a new direction, he replied, "You can switch gears with me anytime," a comment widely interpreted as suggestive. The clip spread everywhere, and LeVar's later attempt to dismiss Molly's reaction, calling her crazy for seeing it as inappropriate, revealed exactly how difficult navigating that environment could be for a female host. These weren't isolated moments. They formed a pattern where Molly repeatedly had to defend her professional boundaries live on national television, often while trying to maintain her composure and keep the show moving forward. Fans questioned whether she truly had support during these situations, especially from her co-host Stephen A., the most powerful person on the set. Some wondered whether she felt alone in dealing with uncomfortable behavior from guests who crossed lines on camera. ESPN's president of content, Burke Magnus, later tried to present the entire situation as a clean, simple business choice. He insisted that the network genuinely wanted to keep Molly and had been discussing ways to transition her into other opportunities beyond First Take. According to Burke Magnus, ESPN supposedly still saw real value in Molly and wanted to keep working with her, just not on First Take. But his explanation raised more questions than answers. If the network truly valued her, why couldn't they reach a compensation agreement that reflected what she brought to the table? And why was the plan to move her away from the show she helped turn into a powerhouse instead of ensuring she felt respected and properly paid right where she already excelled? When you dig into ESPN's salary structure, a glaring pattern shows up. Male on-air talent consistently earns more, even when their roles are comparable. Molly's situation wasn't an anomaly. It was simply the most public and undeniable example of a much bigger issue that insiders had been whispering about for years. And that's what made everything so frustrating for her supporters. Under Molly's moderation, First Take became ESPN's top daily program. She kept intense debates from going off the rails, guided the flow, asked smart questions, and maintained a professional tone even when personalities clashed on live TV. Those skills weren't just helpful, they were essential to the show's success. Yet her compensation made it clear the network viewed her role as secondary to Stephen A.'s analyst position, no matter how vital she was to the overall chemistry. The contrast between how ESPN handled Molly's situation and how they handled Malika Andrews' contract extension couldn't have been more noticeable. Andrews, at just 30, secured a major deal worth several $1 million hours after Molly's departure went public. That quick turnaround suggested ESPN was absolutely willing to invest in female talent, just not necessarily in retaining the experienced women who had already proven themselves over a long period of time. And while Stephen A's first on-air comments about Molly leaving sounded respectful, the tone on his radio show later exposed something more complicated beneath the surface. Emotions, confusion, and an uncomfortable undercurrent that hinted the split wasn't as clean or simple as the public statements tried to make it seem. Stephen A's insistence that Molly's decision came as a shock hinted at something deeper, either a major communication breakdown between the two, or a deliberate choice by Molly to keep her plans quiet, even from the person sitting beside her every morning. And either explanation reveals the same truth. Their partnership was no longer functioning the way it once did. Social media erupted immediately, and a lot of the criticism focused on Stephen A. fans questioned whether he had truly supported Molly during her negotiations, and many pointed out that his silence on the topic felt revealing. These reactions tapped into a bigger conversation about workplace allyship, especially the responsibility that powerful, well-paid employees have to advocate for colleagues who don't hold the same level of leverage. By September 2025, it was clear that the relationship between Stephen A. Smith and Molly Qerim had reached its limit. Whether the tension came from money, respect, communication issues, or a mix of all three, the dynamic that powered First Take for a decade simply couldn't continue anymore, and the aftermath exposed far more than just one professional breakup. Molly's departure pulled back the curtain on long-standing problems inside the sports media world, including pay inequality, uncomfortable workplace dynamics, and the way female talent is treated in an industry still dominated by men. Her exit wasn't just a headline. It became a case study in how networks value certain roles over others, and how quickly things can shift when someone decides they deserve better. ESPN wasted no time trying to stabilize the situation. Within weeks, the network announced an aggressive 30 to 45-day on-air audition process to find the next moderator. Multiple personalities rotated through the seat, with names like Shea Pepler-Cornett and Christine Williamson rising to the top of the discussion. The speed of the search caught fans' attention. It felt unusually rushed, almost as if ESPN wanted to send a clear message that the show would keep moving, no matter who walked away. And that message stood in sharp contrast to how the network treated Stephen A., whose $20 million annual salary essentially signaled that he was the one untouchable figure on the show. This clip from an earlier episode shows Molly pushing back hard against Stephen A.'s provocations. A dynamic that looked entertaining on TV, but behind the scenes, it may have reflected deeper tension about respect and personal boundaries. Viewers love the spark, yet insiders say those moments sometimes expose the imbalance in how each person was treated on set. Meanwhile, reports claimed Fox Sports put a serious offer on the table, around $2 million per year for Molly to join their lineup, nearly 4 times what she was making at ESPN. If those numbers are accurate, it proves that a competing network recognized her value immediately and was ready to pay for it in a way ESPN had never been willing to match. As speculation kept growing, Stephen A's reaction stayed surprisingly restrained. Outside of his first comments, he avoided diving into any specifics about Molly's exit, and that silence created a huge vacuum, one that fans and commentators quickly filled with theories about whether he had truly supported her during a moment that clearly mattered to her career. The emotion in his voice during his on-air remarks felt sincere, but the problem wasn't what he said. It was what didn't come after. There was no public push for ESPN to revisit their offer. No acknowledgement of the shocking pay gap between them. No sign he used his enormous influence to help his co-host secure better compensation, even privately. For many viewers, that absence said more than any statement could. This gap between Stephen A's warm words and his reported behind-the-scenes actions created a tension that a lot of people struggled to ignore. He praised Molly, yet according to multiple insiders, he didn't step in when it mattered most. And for someone with his level of power at ESPN, that raised real questions. Former ESPN personalities quickly began referencing Molly's situation as a major example in broader conversations about pay equity in sports broadcasting. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Stephen A. at $20 million per year, Molly under $600,000 while hosting the same show every weekday. It became a symbol of a deeper, persistent gap that many women in the industry have spoken about for years. And what made this situation even more striking was that Molly wasn't a new hire or an unproven talent. Molly had been with ESPN for 19 years, and she spent a full decade moderating First Take, the very years when the show exploded into the network's most-watched daily program. And that's what makes this situation so unsettling. If someone with her resume, her consistency, and her proven track record still couldn't secure pay that reflected her value? What did that say about ESPN's real commitment to fair compensation? Her departure also forced people to look closer at how debate shows are structured. First Take runs on a very specific formula. Analysts like Stephen A. deliver bold takes and heated arguments, while moderators like Molly keep everything under control, asking sharp questions, steering the flow, managing time, and keeping the atmosphere professional. Both roles are essential. Without the analyst, the show has no spark. Without the moderator, it turns into chaos. Yet the salary gap suggested ESPN viewed one role as far more valuable than the other, even though the show's success depended on both. Then came Stephen A.'s carefully worded statement after her exit. It hinted he knew more than he was sharing, but he chose to keep those details private. The big question became, was he staying quiet to respect Molly's privacy? Or was he avoiding having to address uncomfortable truths about his own involvement? His position in all of this was complicated. Yes, he's an employee who has to protect his own career, but he's also a $20 million a year figure whose influence at ESPN is enormous. And that's why many observers felt he had an opportunity that he didn't take. With his power, he could have advocated for Molly to receive a fairer deal. If the industry reports are accurate, his decision not to step in became a major missed moment for real allyship. His acknowledgement that she had been right there for every major moment of First Take's rise only underscored how critical she truly was to its success. She was present for every milestone, every rating spike, every viral moment. Yet her compensation didn't come close to matching what her co-host received for the exact same shared victories. Women across sports media pointed to Molly's experience as a glaring example of the barriers female talent still faces, even when they've already proven their worth, their value, and their ability to carry a show to the top. The fact that Molly had to walk away from a job she excelled in, on a show she helped transform into ESPN's flagship program, because the network refused to pay her even a reasonable fraction of her male co-host's salary, exposed a brutal truth. Public statements about supporting pay equity mean nothing if they aren't backed up with actual fair compensation. And one of the biggest questions lingering afterward was this: would ESPN pay the next moderator more than they were willing to pay Molly? Or would the replacement also be expected to accept far less than the value they brought to the show? The answer to that question would reveal whether ESPN had learned anything at all from how this situation unfolded. When fans look back at old clips, moments where Molly stood her ground and confidently pushed back against Stephen A.'s commentary, they now carry a different weight. What once looked like assertive on-air banter now feels like someone trying to protect her place and assert her professionalism in an environment where she reportedly wasn't always treated as an equal partner. The math behind all of this is impossible to ignore. If ESPN had offered Molly even $2 million annually, a massive increase from her estimated $600,000, it still would have equaled only 10% of Stephen A. Smith's salary. The network could have quadrupled her pay and still would have been paying her just a sliver of what her co-host made. Yet even that level of investment was apparently too much for them to consider. That sends a message louder than any corporate statement ever could. Molly's exit from First Take became a turning point, not just for ESPN, but for the entire sports media landscape. It forced people to confront uncomfortable questions about how value is measured, how compensation is decided, and how equity is actually practiced behind the scenes. Her decade of service, her consistency, and her critical role in shaping ESPN's top show should have guaranteed her fair treatment. The fact that she still couldn't secure it revealed systemic issues that go far beyond one personality, one contract dispute, or one network. Stephen A. Smith's role in this entire situation, both in what he publicly said and what he reportedly didn't do behind the scenes, is now locked into his ESPN legacy. People will keep debating whether he could have stepped up more for his co-host, whether he should have used his massive influence differently, and whether his silence during key moments revealed deeper issues about workplace support and allyship. Those questions won't fade anytime soon. What is undeniable is that by September 2025, the working relationship between Stephen A. Smith and Molly Qerim had reached a point where continuing wasn't possible anymore. Whether the pressure came from pay gaps, lack of support, awkward workplace dynamics, or a mix of everything, the partnership that carried First Take through a decade of success had finally hit its breaking point. And the lessons from this moment reach far beyond one show. This entire situation forces a hard look at how different kinds of work are valued, especially roles that keep the entire production running smoothly but don't get the spotlight. It also highlights how power shifts inside a company directly influence compensation and raises important questions about the responsibility powerful figures have to advocate for colleagues who don't have the same leverage. But in the end, the viewers who watched Molly moderate First Take with consistency, composure, and control for 10 straight years might be the ones who deliver the clearest verdict. Their reactions made it obvious that audiences recognize her value, even when the network's pay decisions didn't reflect it. She was a major part of why the show worked, and the fans never forgot that. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and drop a comment, and I'll see you on the next one.